Sometimes the people who break your heart are the very people you once carried in your arms. I never imagined I'd live long enough to question whether I still belonged in my own family. When you're young, you think growing old will be about aching knees, slower mornings, maybe forgetting a few names. No one tells you that one day the deepest pain might come from a sentence spoken across the dinner table, not shouted, not whispered with anger, just said, almost carelessly, as if it meant nothing at all. But somehow, those ordinary words found a place inside my heart that never quite healed. I remember the exact afternoon. It was a Sunday, the kind of Sunday I used to love. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the kitchen. My granddaughter was sitting on the floor with a box of crayons, drawing little stick figures she insisted were our whole family. Outside, I could hear children laughing somewhere down the street. For a few beautiful minutes, life felt exactly the way I'd always hoped it would. Simple, warm, home. Then something happened, not dramatic. No one slammed a door. No one raised their voice. In fact, if you had been standing in that room, you probably wouldn't have noticed anything was wrong. My son looked up from his phone and said, "Dad, you're making everything so difficult." Then he went right back to scrolling. The conversation moved on. Everyone else forgot those words before dessert was served. I couldn't. Do you know what's strange about getting older? Your heart doesn't become harder. It becomes quieter. When you're young, you argue, you defend yourself, you explain. But after living through enough birthdays, enough funerals, enough goodbyes, you stop fighting over every hurt. Instead, you carry it, quietly, sometimes for years. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on my porch. The old wooden swing creaked the same way it had for nearly 30 years. The summer air smelled faintly of freshly cut grass. I looked up at the stars and asked myself a question that frightened me more than I care to admit. Have I become a burden? Not. Did he have a bad day? Not. Maybe he didn't mean it. Those thoughts came later. The first thought was much crueler. Maybe I'm the problem. If you're listening to me today, and you've ever gone to bed wondering whether the people you love still truly want you around, I hope you'll stay with me, because I want you to know something I spent far too many years learning. Sometimes, the words people speak reveal far more than they intend. Not every careless sentence is a reason to walk away. Families are complicated. We all say things we later regret. I've certainly said my share. But there are certain phrases, especially when they become a pattern, that slowly chip away at something precious. Not your health, not your money, your dignity. And once a person begins losing that, they often start losing themselves. I wasn't always this quiet. There was a time when my children couldn't wait for me to come home. I can still picture those evenings as clearly as yesterday. The front door would barely open before little feet came running across the hallway. "Dad's home." Those were the sweetest words I'd ever heard. Tiny arms wrapped around my legs before I even had a chance to set down my lunchbox. Back then, I was their protector, their teacher, the man who could fix broken bicycles, chase away bad dreams, and somehow make everything all right. I never imagined there would come a day when I'd hesitate before calling them, afraid I might be interrupting their lives. Life has a funny way of changing our roles. One day you're carrying your children. Years later, you're wondering if they've grown tired of carrying you. Please don't misunderstand me. This isn't a story about blaming sons and daughters. I know life today is harder in many ways. They're working longer hours, raising children, paying bills that seem to grow larger every year. They're tired, just as I once was. I understand that. Understanding, however, doesn't mean we should quietly accept words that slowly convince us we no longer matter. There's a difference between giving someone grace and giving away your self-respect. It took me almost 80 years to learn where that line was, and I almost learned it too late. The first sentence I heard wasn't the worst one. It was simply the beginning, because after hearing it enough times, I slowly started changing myself. I apologized before asking simple questions. I stopped calling unless it felt absolutely necessary. I told myself, don't bother them, they're busy, figure it out yourself. Without realizing it, I was making my own world smaller. Not because anyone told me to disappear, but because I became afraid of taking up space. And looking back now, I realize that's exactly how dignity begins to fade. Not all at once, but one small compromise at a time. What happened next changed the way I understood family forever. Because the next words my son spoke didn't just hurt my feelings. They made me wonder whether my voice still mattered at all. The next time it happened, it caught me completely off guard. Not because the words were harsh, because they sounded so ordinary. It was a Saturday afternoon. My daughter had asked if I wanted to come over for lunch. I was genuinely happy. As you get older, you begin looking forward to the little things. A shared meal, the sound of your grandchildren arguing over board games, the smell of apple pie cooling on the kitchen counter. Those ordinary moments become life's greatest treasures. I arrived a little early. Old habit. Your generation probably understands that. We were raised to believe arriving late was disrespectful. So I sat quietly in the living room while everyone finished getting ready. The grandchildren were laughing upstairs. My daughter was setting the table. My son-in-law was fixing something in the garage. It felt peaceful, like home. After lunch, everyone started talking about buying a new house. They were excited, looking at pictures, talking about neighborhoods, schools, interest rates. Back when I was younger, those conversations always included me. Not because I had all the answers, but because my family genuinely wanted to hear what I thought. This time, I waited until there was a quiet moment. Then I smiled and said, you know, when your mother and I bought our first home, we almost made the same mistake. I barely finished the sentence. My son interrupted me. Not angrily, not rudely, just quickly. Dad, you wouldn't understand. For a second, I honestly thought I'd heard him wrong. I looked at him. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He had already moved on with the conversation. Everyone else had too. The room kept buzzing with excitement, except mine had gone completely silent. You know, there's something strange about getting old. People assume that because your body slows down, your understanding does too, as though wisdom has an expiration date, as though 40 years of paying bills, raising children, making mistakes, starting over, burying people you loved, and surviving life's hardest seasons somehow no longer counts. I didn't expect my children to agree with everything I said. Goodness knows I never agreed with my own father all the time. But I never made him feel as though his life no longer had anything to teach me. There's a difference, a very important difference. When someone says you wouldn't understand, what they're often really saying is, your experience no longer matters here. Whether they intend it or not, that's how it feels. And those feelings have a way of settling into places we don't talk about. You stop offering advice, not because you've run out of wisdom, because you've convinced yourself no one wants to hear it. You stop telling old stories, even though those stories built your family. You become quieter, smaller, more careful. You begin editing yourself before anyone else has the chance to. I know, because I did exactly that. For months, I hardly offered an opinion about anything. Not politics, not family decisions, not even where we should eat dinner. I smiled, I nodded. I told myself they're young, let them live their lives. And there was truth in that. Children should live their own lives. Every parent hopes for that. But somewhere along the way, I crossed a line I didn't even notice. I stopped giving them freedom and started giving away my voice. Those aren't the same thing. One evening I found myself sitting in my workshop. It wasn't much, just an old workbench, a few worn-out tools, and shelves filled with things I'd collected over a lifetime. There was a small wooden birdhouse sitting on the corner. I'd built it with my son when he was 12. Truth be told, he did more hammering than measuring. We laughed the whole afternoon. It leaned slightly to one side when we finished. We both knew it wasn't perfect, but we proudly hung it in the backyard anyway. For years, birds came every spring. Looking at it now, I smiled, not because of the birdhouse, because of the memory. Then I caught myself thinking something that broke my own heart. Maybe those stories don't matter anymore. I sat there for a long time. Then I asked myself a question. If my memories no longer have a place in the conversations, where do they belong? The answer came quietly. They belong to me. And that means they still matter. Because our memories aren't valuable only when someone else listens. They're valuable because they remind us who we are. Every wrinkle on my hands tells a story. Every scar has a lesson. Every gray hair was earned. Age isn't something to apologize for. It's evidence that we've stayed in the fight. A few weeks later, another sentence found its way into my life. This one sounded caring, helpful even. At first, I almost mistook it for kindness. But over time, I realized it was quietly taking something from me that no father should lose, his independence. And I didn't recognize it until it was almost gone. The older I became, the more I realized that losing your strength isn't the hardest part of aging. Losing your place, that's what hurts. A few months after that conversation about the house, my doctor suggested I stop driving at night. He wasn't ordering me to, just advising me to be careful. Truthfully, he was probably right. My eyes weren't what they used to be. The headlights seemed brighter. The roads felt busier. I accepted it without much argument. After all, growing older means learning which battles are worth fighting. I thought that would simply be another adjustment. I had no idea it would become the beginning of something much bigger. One afternoon, my daughter called. "Dad, don't worry about paying your bills anymore. I'll take care of everything." At first, I smiled. What father wouldn't? It sounded like love. It sounded like care. And maybe part of it truly was. So I thanked her. A few weeks later, I needed to renew an insurance payment. I asked where I'd place the paperwork. She looked at me and said, "Dad, just let us handle it." There were those words again, just let us handle it. Now, don't misunderstand me. There are seasons in life when we genuinely need help. I've helped people, and I've needed help. There's no shame in either. The problem wasn't that my children wanted to help me. The problem was they slowly stopped asking what I wanted. One decision became another. One responsibility disappeared after another. Without anyone announcing it, I found myself sitting in the passenger seat of my own life. It's a strange feeling. For 40 years, people came to you when something needed fixing. When the washing machine broke, they called Dad. When the car wouldn't start, they called Dad. When someone was scared, they called Dad. Then one day, everyone still loves you. But nobody asks what you think anymore. Nobody asks what you want. They simply decide, not because they're cruel, because they think they're helping. Sometimes love can accidentally become controlling, especially when it's wrapped inside good intentions. I remember standing in my kitchen one morning. It wasn't anything special, just making coffee. I've made coffee almost every morning for over 50 years. Same old kettle, same blue mug, same quiet routine. As I reached for the coffee tin, my daughter walked in. She smiled and gently took it from my hands. "Dad, sit down, I'll do it." It was such a small moment. Most people would have thought nothing of it. I almost didn't either. But then I noticed something. She didn't ask if I wanted help. She assumed I couldn't do it. There's a difference, a very important difference. Growing older doesn't mean we stop wanting to contribute. In fact, I think we want it even more. We still want to peel the potatoes at Thanksgiving. We still want to carry a grocery bag. We still want to feel useful. Not because we have to prove anything, because usefulness reminds us we're still participating in life. Every time someone says, "Don't worry about it," or "We've got it," without ever asking, a tiny piece of independence quietly slips away. One piece isn't much, but enough tiny pieces, and one day you wake up wondering when you stop being needed. That realization frightened me, not because I was afraid of aging. I've never been afraid of getting older. Growing old is a privilege many wonderful people never receive. What frightened me was becoming invisible while I was still alive. There is a loneliness that comes from an empty house, but there's another kind of loneliness, one that sits much deeper. It's the loneliness of feeling unnecessary, and that loneliness can exist even in a room full of people who love you. One evening I drove to the lake where I'd taken my children fishing when they were little. The old dock was still there, weathered, crooked, exactly as I remembered. I sat there watching the water. An elderly gentleman I didn't know sat down beside me. For several minutes, we didn't say a word. Funny how men my age can sit together in complete silence and somehow still enjoy each other's company. Finally, he looked out across the lake and said, "People think retirement is when a man stops working." He smiled. "I think retirement is when a man starts wondering if anyone still needs him." Those words stayed with me because I knew exactly what he meant. As parents, we spend decades believing our purpose is raising children. But here's something no one tells us. Children grow up. They should. They build families. They make lives of their own. They need us differently. Sometimes they hardly need us at all. That's not failure, that's success. That's exactly what we spend our lives preparing them to do. The mistake comes when we believe that because they need us less, our life has less meaning. It doesn't. Purpose simply changes its address. That evening, sitting by the lake, I made myself a quiet promise. I would never again confuse needing help with surrendering my dignity. If I truly needed assistance, I'd accept it with gratitude. But if I was still capable, I would continue living my own life, making my own choices, speaking my own mind. Because independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about being treated as someone whose voice still matters. I thought I had finally found peace. I thought I'd learned the lesson life was trying to teach me. But I was wrong. Because there were still 2 sentences waiting for me, and the next one hurt in a way I never expected. Not because it questioned what I could do, but because it quietly questioned who I was. There are wounds that heal with time, and then there are wounds that reopen every time you remember the moment they were made. The next one belonged to the second kind. It happened a few weeks before Christmas. The house was full. The grandchildren had turned the living room into a maze of wrapping paper and half-built toys. Christmas music was playing softly in the background. The smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey filled the air. For a little while, I forgot about getting older. I forgot about the quiet doubts I'd been carrying. I was simply a father, watching his family laugh. And honestly, there's no greater gift than that. At one point, everyone gathered around the dining table talking about plans for the coming year. Vacations, work, school, life moved around the table like a river. I listened with a smile. Then I said something simple. "I've been thinking." Before I could finish, someone chuckled and said, "Oh, Dad, here we go again." The table laughed, not cruelly, not loudly, just enough that the conversation rolled right past me. I smiled too. What else was I supposed to do? But inside, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a young boy, embarrassed. Have you ever smiled, just so no one would notice you're heartbreaking? I have, more than once. And if you've lived long enough, there's a good chance you have too. The strange thing about embarrassment at our age is that we rarely react to it. We simply become quieter. We stop finishing our stories. We stop offering our thoughts, not because we've run out of words, but because we've begun believing no one is waiting to hear them. On the drive home that night, I kept thinking about all the years when my children couldn't wait to hear my stories. I'd tell them about the time I got lost on a camping trip, or how I met their mother at a church picnic. I'd exaggerate a little, just enough to make them laugh. They'd ask me to tell the same stories over and over again. Back then, my voice brought people together. Now, it sometimes felt like an interruption. Life has a way of changing without asking our permission. A few days later, I was cleaning out an old drawer when I found a stack of birthday cards. Some were from my wife. Others were from my children when they were still young enough to draw little hearts instead of writing long messages. One card caught my attention. It was from my son. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. In crooked handwriting, he had written, "Dad, you're my hero." I sat there for the longest time, running my fingers over those faded letters, smiling, then crying. Not because I wanted that little boy back. Life isn't meant to move backward. I cried because I realized something. Children don't stop loving their parents overnight. Life simply gets louder. Responsibilities grow heavier. People become distracted. And sometimes, without meaning to, they forget that the people who once carried them still need kindness too. That realization softened my heart. It kept bitterness from taking root, because bitterness is a lonely companion. It promises protection, but steals peace. And after everything life had already taught me, peace was too precious to lose. So I made a decision. I would stop keeping score. I would stop counting phone calls, stop measuring who visited first, stop waiting for people to become who I wished they were. Instead, I would appreciate every genuine moment for exactly what it was: a heartfelt conversation, a warm hug, a grandchild climbing into my lap, a simple "I love you." When those moments came, I would receive them with gratitude, but I would no longer beg for them. Because love offered freely is beautiful. Love chased desperately becomes exhausting. Not long after that, another conversation changed everything. I had called my daughter just to hear her voice. She answered, but I could tell she was busy. I told her it would only take a minute. Before I could finish what I wanted to say, she sighed and said, "Dad, I really don't have the energy for this today." She didn't say it with anger, she sounded tired. And for the first time, I heard something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't rejection, it was exhaustion. That changed the way I saw things. Maybe my children weren't trying to push me away. Maybe they were simply drowning in responsibilities they didn't know how to carry. That didn't make the words hurt any less. But it reminded me of something important. Compassion goes both ways. Parents need understanding. Children do too. The answer wasn't choosing one over the other. The answer was learning to love without losing ourselves. That night I sat on my porch again, just as I had months before. The same old swing, the same quiet neighborhood. But something inside me had changed. I realized I had spent far too much time waiting for someone else to give me permission to feel worthy. And that's a permission no one else can give. It has to come from within. The older I became, the more I understood that dignity isn't something people hand to us. It's something we quietly decide never to surrender. There was only one lesson left for me to learn, the most difficult one of all. Not about my children, not about aging, but about forgiveness. Because until I understood that, I could never truly be free. There was a time in my life when I believed forgiveness meant pretending nothing had happened. If someone hurt me, I stayed quiet. If someone disappointed me, I told myself they'd come around. If someone forgot about me, I found an excuse for them before they even asked. I wore my silence like a badge of honor. I thought that's what strong fathers did. But somewhere along the road, I discovered something I wish someone had told me when I was a much younger man. Silence doesn't always protect a family. Sometimes it protects the very things that are hurting it. And there comes a season in life when honesty becomes kinder than pretending. Not harsh honesty, not angry honesty, just the quiet kind that comes from a heart that's finally tired of carrying everything alone. A few months after Christmas, I asked both of my children to come by the house. Nothing formal, just coffee. The same old coffee pot that had served our family for decades. The same kitchen table where homework had been finished, birthday cakes had been cut, and countless prayers had been whispered before meals. I looked around that little kitchen and realized most of my life had happened within those four walls. I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't there to make anyone feel guilty. I simply wanted them to hear something I'd never been brave enough to say. When they arrived, we talked about ordinary things at first. The weather, the grandchildren, the neighbor's new puppy that seemed determined to bark at every passing squirrel. We laughed. It felt familiar, comfortable. Then I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and quietly said, "Can I tell you something? Not as your father, but simply as an old man who's still learning." The room became very still. I said, "Lately, I've started feeling like I'm trying very hard not to be in anyone's way. No accusations, no blame, just the truth." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then something happened that surprised me. My daughter reached across the table and took my hand. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Dad, I had no idea you felt that way." My son didn't say anything at first. He simply looked down at the table. The same man who once climbed onto my shoulders to watch 4th of July fireworks now looked like a little boy who couldn't find the right words. Finally, he sighed and said, "I thought I was helping. I never meant to make you feel unwanted." That sentence didn't erase the hurt. Some wounds need time. But it opened a door that had been closed for far too long. A door called understanding. Sometimes people don't realize the weight of their words until someone gently tells them. Now, I know not every family conversation ends that way. Some of you listening may have already tried. You may have spoken honestly. You may have offered forgiveness. You may have prayed for healing. And still, nothing changed. If that's your story, my heart is with you, because I know how deeply that can hurt. But I also want you to hear this from someone who's walked a long road. Your worth has never depended on someone else's ability to recognize it. Never. Not when you were 40, not when you were 60, not now. Your dignity isn't something another person gets to approve. It belongs to you. Always has. Always will. The greatest lesson old age has given me isn't about slowing down. It isn't about retirement. It isn't even about learning to let go. It's learning where to place my heart. I no longer chase every invitation. I no longer measure love by how often the phone rings. I no longer believe that being needed is the same as being valued. Instead, I've learned to treasure the people who make room for me without making me feel guilty for existing. A neighbor who stops to chat over the fence. An old friend who still remembers my birthday. A church member who saves me a seat every Sunday. A grandchild who asks, "Grandpa, tell me that story again." Those moments may seem small, but they remind me that life still has beautiful chapters left to write. I've also learned something about solitude. When I was younger, I was afraid of being alone. Now I understand there's a world of difference between being alone and being at peace. Some of the most peaceful evenings of my life have been spent sitting on my porch with nothing more than a cup of coffee, the sound of birds settling into the trees, and the quiet certainty that I no longer have to earn my place in this world. What a gift that is, to reach the final chapters of life and finally stop apologizing for taking up space. If there's one thing I'd like to leave with you today, it's this. Never confuse love with permission for others to diminish your spirit. Love deeply, forgive generously, listen patiently, keep your heart soft. But don't make yourself smaller just to make someone else more comfortable. The people who truly love you won't ask you to disappear. They'll make room for you. Not because you're perfect, not because you're useful, simply because you're family. And if someone can't offer you that, don't carry guilt for choosing peace. Choosing peace isn't walking away from love. Sometimes it's the deepest expression of self-respect you've ever known. As I grow older, I find myself thinking less about how many years I have left, and more about how I want to spend the days I've been given. I want to spend them laughing without apology, remembering with gratitude, forgiving without becoming a fool, loving without losing myself, and waking each morning thankful that after all these years, I'm still here. Still learning, still growing, still finding reasons to smile. Maybe that's the real gift of aging. Not that life becomes easier, but that we finally learn what truly deserves a place in our hearts. Before we part today, I'd love to hear from you. Has there ever been a sentence, just a few simple words, that quietly changed the way you saw a relationship? Share only what you're comfortable sharing. You never know whose heart might find comfort in your story. And if these conversations remind you that you're not walking this road alone, I'd be honored to have you join our 100-Year Stories family. We're not here because life has been perfect. We're here because every wrinkle carries wisdom, every scar carries a lesson, and every season of life still holds meaning. Until next time, take gentle care of your heart. After all, it's carried you through every chapter of your story, and I believe your most peaceful chapter may still be ahead.